Thank you so much, Lynn. This is such a great day for me because I've been a fan of yours for a very, very long time and read your books for years. I've been a great, great fan of yours. And I'm placed here in the Nordic countries, and I'm not sure everybody in the Nordic countries know who you are and everybody in Europe, but I want to make sure I do my part so they get to know you. So, welcome everybody, because today you're going to meet what I would call a humanitarian giant. And just to give people a little idea of who you are, when you go to Amazon and read your bio, it takes almost as long as reading one of your books because it's so enormous. I mean, listen to this. For more than 40 years, Lynne Twist has been recognized global visionary committed to alleviating poverty, ending world hunger, empowering the status of women and girls, supporting social justice and environmental sustainability. The breadth and scope of Lynne's work ranges from working with Mother Teresa in Calcutta to working with refugees in the camps in Ethiopia and the threatened rainforest of Amazon, as well as guiding the philanthropy of some of the world's wealthiest families and working directly with the women who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And Lynne's on-the-ground work has brought her a deep understanding of global issues, the challenges women and girls face worldwide, people's relationship with money, and the transformation of human consciousness. Her extensive knowledge and experience has led her to profound insights about the social tapestry of the world and the historical landscape of the times in which we're living. And I wanted to read that to people because I just want to make sure people know what a privilege we have today to have you with us live. It's such an honor. And thank you so much, first and foremost, for everything you've done so far.
Well, thank you, Kirsten. It's just a joy and an honor to spend this next hour with you and anyone who's listening.
Yes. And we will broadcast this in many forms because I think that you've come with so many important messages throughout the past 40 years. But right now, we are in times of severe crisis, and they have probably never been more severe than they are right now. And what many people experience is that in times of crisis, we feel like cocooning. We feel like we can't take on the problems of the world. We are too burdened ourselves. Everybody now is worried about the war in Europe. People are worried about rising prices of electricity, inflation, how we're going to get through the winter. So the environment, other people's poverty, people down in Africa, the rainforest, it seems very, very far away. And many, many people think, I can hardly hold myself up. So how can I care about others? And then you come with an audacious proposition, because you actually say, it's not about you. It's about living a committed life. And I just want to quote your book title, Living a Committed Life, Finding Freedom and Fulfillment in a Purpose Larger Than Yourself. So I'd like you to start by explaining how can that paradox coexist, that we feel like I have enough in myself, and you say, no, it's not about you, it's about living a committed life, serving a larger purpose than yourself. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful introduction and that wonderful question. Well, let me just say that, just underline and mirror back to you that I do realize that we're in like a breakdown of such epic proportions that it's almost hard to confront it as a human being. Every kind of stability in society has been shaken and is dissolving before our eyes, really. And, we have this huge healthcare crisis with COVID and the ensuing viruses in different forms and shapes and versions that continue to haunt us and just will not go away. We have this impact from that and from the war in the Ukraine, that the economy is it's scary. scary. Things are not available, everything's more expensive, and it doesn't look like it's going to get better. It looks like it's just going to get worse. We obviously have a huge democratic crisis in the United States where I live. Democracy is under a threat that I certainly haven't seen in my lifetime. Education is failing us, particularly in my part of the world. I don't think it's so bad in Scandinavia, but the education system in the United States is totally failing. Many, many kids are falling through the cracks, and the COVID thing just made it 10 times worse. And when you think about it, all the big institutions of humankind that we've relied on, which really been like the infrastructure for our lives, has been shaken and is not operating not only well, but it pretty much is in breakdown. And then this giant crisis with the natural world, with the global warming and what's, kind of the climate crisis, which is a term that includes species extinction and global warming and, the holes in the ozone and just all the things that are so big you can't even think about them without being almost in tears. So I don't want to rub it in too much, but we are living in really intense times. And rather than retract from all of that, which seems like the obvious thing to do, I'm suggesting that people step into it, step forward, that realize that this is a gigantic transformational opportunity, that this is a window, a aperture, a moment when we as a species are being called to evolve, to take a evolutionary leap, to be like, there's this wonderful phrase from the landmark work, when the first fish crawled up on land, elephants and eagles became possible. And that's the power of evolution. And these crises are so interconnected. It's not like they're just, happen to be happening at the same time. No, it's all part of, in my view, a breakdown that's so profound that it is causing and literally calling for a breakthrough in our own species. My belief, or my assertion, I'll say, is that within every breakdown, no matter whether it's a personal one in your own life that's just really about you, like you've lost your job, or the death of a loved one, or a cancer diagnosis, or divorce, breakdowns that are highly personal. In the space of every breakdown, I believe there are the seeds somewhere in there. If they're watered, if they're nourished, if there's paid attention to, those are the seeds of a breakthrough that's greater than the breakdown in every case. And if you look back at your own life, you'll see the things that were hardest to get through taught you what you needed to learn or find out about yourself, that deepened your capacity to be um, loving, to be transformable, to get through it, to be stronger, to see the strength and power of the human spirit that lives within all of us. And I think it's true for humanity. I actually think we're in a big, giant rebirth, you could say, that's beginning with what for those of us who've had children will remember morning sickness. That when you're pregnant and you don't know it, you think you're sick because you're throwing up in the morning, you're nauseous most of the day, you have to rest all the time, you are wanting strange foods, you think there's something wrong with you until you go to the doctor and you find out you're pregnant. And then the whole thing shifts. You're still throwing up in the morning. You still need to rest in the afternoon. You still feel nauseous, but it's exciting. There's a context for it. There's a frame. There's a vision that you're going towards, which is having a baby. And the whole thing makes sense to you in a way that it's thrilling, and you can endure it. In fact, you're kind of honored when people give you a seat on the bus, or when everybody wants to carry your groceries, and when everybody tells you need to take care of yourself. You suddenly are very, very special rather than very, very sick. And I feel like that's what's happening to us now. This pandemic, you could say, is a kind of mourning sickness for a species that's lost its way and that is being called and is calling on itself to be reborn, to take an evolutionary leap, to become a species that's kinder, more consistent with, and more in touch with the community of life, more honoring of her mother, of our mother, uh, and that everything comes from the earth. The virus comes from the earth. The economy, everything, economic tools we have come from the earth. The computer I'm looking at comes from the earth. Everything comes from the earth. And what's coming from the earth now is feedback, major, powerful feedback in the form of the climate crisis, the pandemic, feedback. If you look at it as feedback, then you can see that it's giving us the opportunity, the aperture, the kind of feedback instructions that we need to make a major course correction. We're not flawed as a species. We're just off course. And if you think about a pilot who wants to, let's say, fly from Sweden to San Francisco, that pilot will set their flight plan, but then there's weather and there's all kinds of things, and they have to keep adjusting the flight plan to get to the destination. And we're in a big shift to the flight plan as a human family because we want to survive. We want to be flourishing. We want to be a species that's kind, that's loving, that's interconnected, that honors the earth, that honors one another, that honors future generations. And we're not doing that now. So we need to shift our flight plan big time. So that doesn't mean that I don't want to step over the suffering, the tremendous suffering that's coming with the war, that's coming with the climate events, the hurricanes, the floods, the fires here in California, the mudslides, the drought. I don't want to step over the pain of people losing relatives and loved ones to COVID or having it themselves. I had it several times myself. That has shaken us to our core. At the same time, not stepping over that suffering, not acknowledging it, but having said that, we're in some sort of a huge transformational moment. And if you have that context, if you have that way of seeing, then you step into this transformation. You realize we're being called to be a higher level species than we've been before. We're called to be a more committed species. We're being invited into stepping into life, not stepping back from it, but stepping into life in a way that we bond together, that we hold hands with each other, that we make it through this wormhole, this hourglass, this moment, this test, you could say. And every pregnancy, if we think of ourselves as pregnant with a new kind of human being, and it's a collaboration, men and women, but women have a primary role, I believe, in giving birth to this new kind of human being in this, what I call the Sophia century. But not every pregnancy produces a child. So you need to take care. We need to understand what's happening to us. We need to nourish this new life that's coming through. And who knows how long the pregnancy is going to be. And then giving birth itself hurts. It hurts. And one of the things that's beautiful about giving birth, that's very consistent with a phrase I use in the book that comes from Michael Beckwith, a great American, African-American minister. Pain pushes until vision pulls. Pain pushes until vision pulls. And I know you have children. I remember when I was giving birth, I knew the more it hurt, the closer I was to having a baby. And that allowed me to go through the pain. In fact, I wanted the pain to be worse so that it would produce the vision, which was a new child, a new life, a new being that I would be so grateful to have come into the world through my body. So this would be a long answer to your question, but I feel that when I started writing this book, that it's timely, that living a committed life where we step into life, that we collaborate with each other, that we put our arms around each other, that we help each other through this, that we know that we each and every one of us have a role to play, or we wouldn't be alive right now. That's my assertion. I can't prove that, but I think everybody has a role to play. And it's not a big role or a small role, it's just your role. And if you play it, it'll light up your life, and you'll feel freedom rather than constraint. You'll feel fulfillment rather than worry. You'll move from being a world worrier to a world warrior for the good, for the common good. And I think that's what we're being called to do. And I recommend that response because it's exhilarating, it's freeing, and you find out who you are at a new level when you step forward into life rather than retract from it.
It's so beautiful, and it's interesting that we record this on a day where I actually got to live your message, because on this day, 11 years ago now, my middle son got diagnosed with incurable cancer, and my whole life turned upside down.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and I can testify that you are right, that a vision invites us to grow taller. A vision invites us to step up and be and do something we never would have thought possible. So the first vision I had when this happened was to find new ways of curing cancer. So that was my vision that held me like that hindered me in falling into fear, because fear can paralyze us, and I think that happens for a lot of people.
Yes.
When we're shaken, fear grabs us, and then we're paralyzed, or we go into the reptile brain, and there's not much creativity there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we have a vision, we get more creative. Okay, then let's go and find new ways.
Yes.
And so that's what I experienced, that the vision made me creative, and it gave also a direction for my energy. So instead of being, my energy being swamped by and swallowed by fear, and me collapsing from it and not being a good mother, and also actually I would say we do affect each other. That's what we learned from the pandemic. So if a mother goes into fear, what does she give her children? More fear. So I knew I couldn't afford that. And so half a year later, we actually had cured his incurable cancer.
Oh my God.
But yeah, which was a miracle. So it showed what's possible. And then the paradox is that the day after we celebrated that we had cured the incurable cancer, he died. 7 years and 4 months young. And so you could say that was a bigger crisis, an even bigger crisis, especially because I thought I had just succeeded on my vision. So the night he died, of course, it crumbled my world. So my crisis got even worse. So what you're saying, true labor pain for something new that wants to emerge. And then I remember taking on a new vision. So I committed myself to go up instead of down from this crisis. And I would just be it, I just want to be a testimonial to your invitation for people, because I actually experienced what you are suggesting is so true. That decision to go up instead of down gave me a new direction, and it opened up possibilities that were hitherto impossible. So a lot of people say, why do I have to go through crisis? What is it that I'm supposed to? Did I do something wrong? And I don't subscribe to that philosophy. In my experience, the crisis we go through is because that's the only way we can learn. Yeah. I learned something from my son's death that I couldn't have learned in other ways.
Yeah.
And so I can really say you're right. It was so painful, but it was also, to make that decision to go up instead of down, a lot of beauty actually opened, so much love, so much help, many pathways, so many people. I met Michael Beckham, actually, one of the magic people I met. There was it was a new path that opened, and today I can say I don't feel like a victim. I never felt like a victim. I feel blessed that someone had the confidence that I could go through this.
Yes.
And that there's so many solutions available on Earth now that it's actually, I would say it's possible for all of us, because at the same time as there are many more crises, there are many more solutions,
Yes.
right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Wow.
it's but what I wanted to ask you, because in my experience, that journey, the way that I can now sit today and be not bitter, not feel like a victim, even though now I have only 2 children on earth and I have one in heavens. The reason why I can still feel my life expanded, I got so many more tones in my heart. I got such a wider perspective. I got so much more surplus and energy for other people. And I really committed myself to a larger purpose, which is to serve humanity. I mean, after his death, that became the only interesting purpose for me, because my loss was so deep that I wanted a purpose that was so high. But here's my question for you. For me, this required so much inner work.
Yeah.
It required so much inner work. I mean, I've been at it for 11 years now. So, and I was really committed to inner work before, but I had to do inner work in a different league. So here's my question for you. What about people who've never done any kind of inner work? I mean, this requires certain surplus, it requires access to methods to help to, so don't you think it requires a lot of inner work to be able to commit to a larger purpose? I mean, most people would like to, and it looks good, and many people commit to, we have corporate people who commit to saving the environment, but they don't really. And there's people who like the idea of being a good person, but in actuality, they don't always act like it. So I find that there is actually some inner work to do to be able to commit to a larger purpose. And I'd like to hear your take on that.
Well, I think first of all, thank you for sharing your story. It's just heartbreaking and heart opening and inspiring to hear your story, Kirsten, and just what you did with a tragedy that could just flatten most people is miraculous, and a beautiful example of courage and strength and resolve and transformation. Really, wow. Have to just take a moment here and thank you for sharing that. Well, I think that yes, inner work. You and I, and probably many of the people listening to this, either can afford to do inner work, which is taking courses and working with teachers, maybe. But maybe they can't do that, or maybe that's not accessible for them. Yes, if it is accessible, I highly, highly recommend it. I highly recommend meditation. I highly recommend prayer. I highly recommend faith if that's your path. I highly recommend getting a coach if you don't have one. I highly recommend taking the many, many, many courses now that are just a click away, and many of them are free. However, I also know that for some people, the way to the transformation that you had is through action, and through action that is in service. So there's so many examples of this. I think President Zelensky is an example in the Ukraine. Here's this guy who was a comedian, who was on, television. He was, you wouldn't think of a guy who was doing inner work exactly. Maybe he was. I don't really know enough about him. But if you think about the way that he has led and expressed a leadership that definitely comes from the depth of the guts of who he is in his soul. He's an example that he's going through the fire, really, and it's real. And he found his almost dharma through the crisis, in ways that you did too. Sometimes the what we're calling inner work in this conversation is really that you get swept off your feet by the demand to be someone you have never needed to be. And sometimes it's action or a crisis that's an outer crisis that creates that, like a hurricane or a flood. In the California fires that we've had here over and over again. The heroism, the generosity, the people moving whole families into their house for 2 or 3 years, people going out and working with the volunteer fire departments and finding in themselves a thrill, an excitement, a capacity to serve they never even knew they had. People now working in the homeless crisis in my city, which is just horrendous, are finding their own dharma through the horror of the outrageous homeless crisis we have in San Francisco. So I don't think there's any formula for it, really. I think we're all being called in whatever way we hear the call and respond to it. It develops our inner life for us, or we work on our inner life, and that gives us the capacity to make a big commitment. I don't know that there's a chicken or an egg to this. When I think about it, I know that it's what's being demanded of us is everything that you just said, is the development of what you and I are calling an inner life. And that is the dimension of the soul that has been eclipsed by consumerism, by the economic demand for wealth and money and accumulation of things that we don't need, and the destruction of the natural world. It has eclipsed, almost obfuscated, the soul of who we are. And inner work, as you've done so beautifully yourself, illuminates the soul, has it shine through. And that's a direct route, and I totally support that. At the same time, I also see, and I've seen this in my work with hunger and poverty, the incredible power of the human spirit in Ethiopia when the 1984-1985 famine took 1 million lives in the Rift Valley of Ethiopia. When I was there after that famine, the human spirit in people was so strong in the face of the horror of losing their own children to starvation. I've been in Bangladesh after the tsunamis and floods, and the strength of people pulling together to rebuild their houses after they've been totally destroyed. These environments of test are now on a global scale, And it seems like it's in the outer world that we're being tested. But in order to deal with it, we need to draw an inner strength that we don't even know we have. And one of the points I make in the book is that if you feel a commitment larger than your own life coming to fruition in your consciousness, and you commit to it, that commitment comes back and shapes you into the person you need to be to fulfill it, rather than you need to be all transformed before you make the commitment. It's kind of the other way around. The commitment you made after your son died, the commitment you made when your son was diagnosed, in response to his diagnosis, made you into the mother you needed to be to cure cancer, if I can put it that way. And then the commitment you made to lead to take the high road rather than the low road, you could say, which is a phrase from Michelle Obama, after he died, that commitment turned you into the extraordinary woman you are today, leading the 21st century leadership kind of courses that are changing the lives of, I'm sure, thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of women. So I guess what I'm saying is there's no formula, but we're all in this together now. And we all are being called to be more than we've ever needed to be or ever been called to be. And that is a gift. I know it sounds terrible because the world is a mess, but the gift in it is the gift that you demonstrate with your life work, that you demonstrate with your life path, that you just demonstrated by sharing your story. So however it comes to us, I say seize it, whether it comes from inner work or it comes from an outer crisis. Seize it and know that it will shape you, it will mold you into who you need to be to fulfill a commitment larger than your own life. And if you stay stuck in your own life starring you and just protecting yourself and the close ones near you, you'll retract, you'll get smaller, you'll lose your contact with the soul. And I know that seems, for people listening, like the thing to do when things get scary. And maybe for a moment we do that. But then what really transforms the world and us is stepping into the crisis, stepping into it and knowing that it's there to teach, to open, to mold, to test, and to call us to be go beyond what we knew we could do. And your stories is just, I should have put you in the book. I didn't know you then. I would have put you in there.
No, but I've actually met some people through you that are my role models, and that's when you talk about the Ethiopian women who lost all their children in the famine. I mean, for me, that's like, and you tell the story of how you actually told this, you shared, you together in the community shared the story of every single child, a 2-year-old walking through what she thinks is water, and it turns out to be a Fata Morgana, and then she drops. I mean, it puts everything in perspective. An Ethiopian mother losing all her 11 children to famine.
Oh.
It's like so that's my role models, and I just, now that we talk about them, how on earth did they move on?
Mm. Mm.
You've been with these women.
Yeah.
How can they move on after that?
Yeah. I'll obviously never, ever, ever get over that. It's something over which I hope to never get, if I can put it that way. It's a strange use of English language. Well, in that case, the traditions of the nation, of the culture, of grieving each child individually with such intensity, and wailing and keening and screaming and naming the magnitude of the grief for that child, and then recovering, resting, and then naming the next child who died of starvation, and talking about his life or her life, and then wailing and keening and crying and screaming for hours over the loss of that child, and then taking a rest, and then the next child. I mean, we did that for 5 days and 5 nights with all the children that were lost by the 7 women. And the catharsis of grief, and I'm sure you're probably an expert on this now yourself, the emotional, just the physical experience of wailing the way we did, and then resting the body and the heart before we took on the next honoring. It was a way of honoring the life and death of each child, somehow cleansed and purified and prepared those women to take on a new life as a childless mother and become in service to their country, get themselves educated, and become women who would give the rest of their life over to protect other mothers from ever going through that. Witnessing that and being part of that was one of the great privileges of my life. And I'll never get over it. I don't ever want to get over it. And I think the wailing and the crying and the permission to go as deep into the pain as they could gave them access to almost like pain and joy are one continuum, and pain is way, way, way over this side, and joy is way over this side. And the more pain you allow yourself to fully experience, the more the capacity for joy. Just like you said, your heart grew there were more tones. I love that phrase when you said that. I wrote that down. More tones in your heart, more dimensions to your heart. So I don't know, if I had been subjected to that kind of tragedy, losing all my children to famine, to starvation, and not being able to save them myself, I don't know what I would have done in my culture, there's not that kind of honoring of death that's as deep, emotionally deep, as what I saw there and witnessed. I might have taken my own life then. But no, they didn't do that. They gave their life rather than take it. They gave it. So that really impacted me too. And I love that that story impacted you and the people who read it.
I really met my my shining stars in this. This is motherhood at its very most extraordinary, because they became mothers for a nation, mothers for a birthing world, and
Yes.
hallelujah for that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many amazing stories in your book, and I really would love to hear your own story of how you came to live a committed life.
Well, I I say in the book, and I really mean this, the death of my father, although tragic, and I thought the world had ended really, because I like all girls loved my father, but in my case, I was devoted to him. I'm one of four children. I'm the third of four, and he was a musician, a very, very fine pianist, and also a band leader, and a famous man, so very charismatic. And I was the musical one. I was the one who had inherited some of the gifts that he had. I could sing, I could dance, I could play the piano, I could do all the things that I took every possible lesson. And I took it because I wanted to please my dad. And when I was turning 14, my 13th birthday, 14th birthday, right in there, sometimes young women are kind of in love with their dad. They're becoming adolescent, they're everything's starting to kick in. They're becoming a young woman. And for me, he was it, he hung the moon. And when he died very suddenly of a heart attack, there was no illness, there was no warning. He was only 50. He went to sleep one night. We all went to sleep, and the next morning we all woke up, and he didn't. He died in his sleep, no struggle, and his heart just stopped. And it was so shocking that I thought in some way it must have been my fault. Now, that's illogical, but children often feel that way when a parent dies and there's no explanation. There wasn't an illness. I thought it was because I didn't practice my piano. I didn't think this cognitively or consciously, but I know in my heart that I felt, how could he leave? What did I do like that? And I became religious, very religious, because we were Catholic. And that was what was available to me. I didn't understand or know about spirituality. So the death of my father was a huge event in my life where I discovered the power of prayer, faith, what I'd now call meditation and spiritual practice, but I didn't name it that way then. I just wanted to pray. I wanted to go to church. I wanted to go on retreat. I wanted to, and I did it privately because I was a popular kid, and I was a cheerleader, and I was homecoming queen, and I was one of those kind of kids. So I was, I dated the football star, and I was just kind of that kind of a person. So it wasn't cool to be going to church all the time. So I did it silently, privately. And I developed what you and I are calling an inner life, a very, very deep inner life at age 14, 15, 16, when kids are all about, their friends. And I was all about my friends too on the outside, but something very deep was going on the inside of my life. I can now see retrospectively. And I developed a kind of core soulfulness that has served me to this day. And then, there were other points that I'll mention because that wasn't the only thing. I became very involved in poetry in college. I went to Stanford University, and I got very involved in poetry, which became a kind of spiritual path for me, a secular spiritual path. And then I fell madly in love with my husband, who I'm still in love with now, and he's my rock. And we got married when I was still in school. I was a senior in college, and we've been married for 56 years, so it worked. And I took the EST training, which is now called the Landmark Forum, um, in the early days of that human potential movement, and just it was a huge passage for me to what now is called the human potential movement. And I got very involved in that. And then Buckminster Fuller came along. I became completely into his work, and he was called the grandfather of the future. He lived in the 20th century and invented all kinds of wonderful things, but mostly what he invented was living a life of commitment. And I wanted to be just like him. So after the EST training and the landmark work and really having a place to develop myself, I became involved in ending world hunger. And once I made that big, giant commitment, it took me all over this planet, took me to the feet of Mother Teresa, took me to Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Ghana, Senegal, South Africa, all over Asia. And then eventually I had an epiphany that took me to the Amazon. So I had all these epiphanies, and people might say, well, I don't have all those epiphanies. That's not fair. But the thing is, I think my experience of developing an inner life and a consciousness had me paying attention to the world in a way that I could see when I was being called for something. And that's really what I recommend, because I think everybody gets signs and they don't see them because they're not paying attention. Everybody's being called. Everybody has these moments. I can describe mine pretty well in retrospect, but at the time I didn't really know what was happening to me. It was confusing. I didn't really understand who Buckminster Fuller was, but I was drawn to him. I didn't really know what I was doing when I first got involved in ending world hunger. I thought, wow, this is sweeping me off my feet. I want to get involved, but I didn't know why. When I went to the Amazon, I thought, this is just a one-time deal. You don't really know what is shaping you, but if you allow yourself to be called into service, you can trust it. You can trust it. And it will shape you into the person you need to be to fulfill a commitment you may not even understand you've made. So it's quite mysterious and mystical and not that formulaic, but I do say that being conscious and paying attention and knowing, and that's really the purpose of my book, knowing that you're here not by accident, and your life is really not about you. Your life has been given to you so that you can give it. That's really why we've been given life, so that we can give it. When we're blessed, the purpose of being blessed is so that we can bless. It's all about that. And not to squander our life or try to, develop it just for ourselves. The purpose of human potential work is to develop the human potential of our species, not just you and me, so that we feel better about ourselves. No, way beyond that. And when we answer that call, when we respond to it, yes, we develop our life gets developed beyond what we could never have done if it was just about us. But you can't do it for that reason, because that's kind of cheating. It really needs to be authentically in service of something larger than your own life. And so in my case, I was called over and over and over and over again. And sometimes I resisted it and pretended like it wasn't happening, or tried to push it away because it looked too big or too scary. But eventually I surrendered over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it has been a source of freedom for me. And I recommend it to everyone.
It's certainly so fascinating to hear about how you got called, and I really would love to hear the story about how you got called to create the Pachamama Alliance, because this is such an important alliance in this era, because it's protecting the lungs of our world. So can you is it possible to tell that story, to give us a little insight on how you got to to work for the lungs of our planet.
Mm.
The lungs and the medicine cabinet, and everything that comes from this rainforest is so important. The wisdom of the indigenous people is what we need now. So it's really, you've done like an amazing piece of work there that I really would like people to know about, because it's too important to not know about it. But how did you get to call to do that?
Well, I was very, very devoted to ending world hunger through the Hunger Project, is the organization I worked for for several decades. And I thought my life purpose was ending world hunger, and that whether it happened in my lifetime or not, that was what I was completely and totally devoted to. That's not an overstatement. It was my life, along with my children and my husband. We all were involved. And then I found myself in Guatemala. Now, we being the Hunger Project, were working in sub-Saharan Africa and the subcontinent of India. So those countries that was where I worked. And then I raised money in the rest of the world for that work. But I wasn't working at all in South America or Central America. I didn't have any attention on that part of the world. There's poverty there, but hunger was not an issue when I was working on that. So I found myself in Guatemala to help out a friend who wanted me to train his development director for a project he had there. And when we were in Guatemala, I went with a man named John Perkins, who had been in the Peace Corps in the Amazon and was very familiar with shamanism and indigenous people. And that wasn't my world. But anyway, I was there doing this favor for my friend Bob. And this other friend, John Perkins, was part of the trip we took to Guatemala. And it became clear at some point in this journey that there was a shaman involved in the projects that we were looking at. So we went to see the shaman, and he agreed to work with 12 of our travelers, this group that we were with, and invited us to meet him on a mesa in the mountains of Guatemala at midnight for a ceremony. And I was fascinated. I really wanted to do it. And there were 12 of us who participated in this. And it began at midnight, and it was on in a very rural area of Guatemala, where there was no cities or towns around, where we met this shaman. And he had built a fire on this area in the mountains. And he didn't speak English, and he didn't speak Spanish. He only spoke Mayan. So it was very confusing dealing with him. We really weren't sure what he was saying most of the time, but my friend John spoke a little Mayan and was fluent in Spanish, so he translated. And the shaman had us lay down with our feet towards this fire like a big wagon wheel. And this was under a very, very starry sky. There was no moon, and it was super clear. So the stars were just incredible. And here's this fire, and 12 of us laying around the fire with our feet towards the fire like a wagon wheel. And the shaman starts to drum. And then he starts to whistle. And then he starts to chant. And he tells us to just close our eyes and listen to his voice and journey. And there was no medicine, just this man's amazing whistling and his amazing drumming and his amazing chanting, and the crackling fire and the starry sky. And I closed my eyes, and it was midnight. So, it was logical to sleep and dream maybe, but I wasn't sure about journey. I didn't know what he meant. But sure enough, I started to feel like I was in some sort of an altered state. And I began to feel my right arm quiver like this. And I suddenly had to extend it. No matter what, I had to extend it. And then it was my left arm that was quivering, and I had to extend that. And then this sort of hard beak-like thing seemed to be growing on my face, and I just had to fly. I couldn't have laid there for one more second. And I began to lift my body up in slow motion, up into this starry, heavenly sky that was just filled with light. With the Milky Way was so bright you could practically read by it. And I flew up into these glorious stars. And then I looked down because I could hear the shaman's voice. He seemed right there with me. I could hear his whistling. I could hear the drumming. I could hear his chanting. And I looked down and I could see myself and the other 11 people around the fire. But somehow I was up here flying, and it was blissful and mesmerizing and so joyful. And I kept flying, and this is kind of like in slow motion. That was the experience. And I looked down, and I realized it was starting to dawn. And I saw that I was flying over a vast, almost unending forest of green. It was so beautiful, so glorious, so green, so abundant. And I looked down through the trees, and I could see all the way to the forest floor. I could see little critters running around on the forest floor. And then when I would look up, my gaze would go for what seemed to be hundreds of miles. And it was just awesome. And as I'm flying in slow motion like this, it was this kind of sound of the shaman's voice and the drumming. I was in a kind of hypnotic, beautiful space as this giant bird. And I looked down and I saw these disembodied faces of men, just faces of men with orange geometric face paint on their faces like this, and yellow, red, and black feather crowns on their heads, floating up from the forest floor, calling to the bird, calling to me in a strange tongue. And then they would disappear back into the forest, and then they would reappear again. And then they would disappear back into the forest, and then they would reappear again. And I just kept flying. And it was this kind of, I don't know, like a serenade, or they were calling to the bird, but there was a beauty in their call. And I would, see them, and then I would fly on, and then it would reappear. And this went on and on. And it was very, very beautiful, very moving, very, I was in some sort of state. I was mesmerized into a incredible experience of bliss. And then I heard a very loud drum beat like this, bang, 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 bang. And I remember sitting up and realizing that I didn't have a beak and I didn't have wings. And I opened my eyes and I saw that everyone around the circle had been through some sort of a strange experience too. Everybody was sort of discombobulated, and the big fire had gone down to embers. So it was quite a while. And I looked across the circle, and the shaman was sitting there, and he was looking at all of us. And when he looked at me, I felt a strange kind of feeling over my body. And then he asked each person to share their vision, and we went around one by one, and every single person had become an animal, everyone. And I shared the story of becoming this giant bird. And then it went around the circle to my friend John Perkins, who was the translator and also a shaman himself, a white shaman. And he had the same vision I had. And that was very strange. No one else had it, just he and I. So then the shaman completed the ceremony, dismissed everyone but John and myself, and asked us to stay. And then he told us that we were being communicated to, that it wasn't a normal vision, that we were being called, and that we needed to go to the people that were calling us. Now, I didn't know what to do with that because I was only there for 2 weeks. I had really a lot of work to do in the world of ending world hunger. This was a novelty, but I didn't really know what to do with it. And so I told my friend John, you go wherever they are. And he said, well, I know who they are and I know where they are. They're the Achuar people of southern Ecuador, and they're a tribe that's asking for first contact. I know because I was with the Shuar people, who are their neighbors, and a Achuar war party came into our camp and told the Shuar, we're ready for contact, and we're going to begin initiating contact with the outside world before it comes to us in ways we can't control. And he said, that's who they are. They have the same facial markings. I recognize those crowns. It's the Achuar. They're calling for first contact. Lynne, this is a huge, huge privilege. We have got to go to the Amazon. I said, I can't go to the Amazon. I'm ending world hunger. I have to be in Africa, in Ghana. So he said, they will not leave you alone till you come. And he warned me. And I said, John, you go to the Amazon. I can't do that. So I went on to Ghana, which is in West Africa, for a board meeting in Accra, the capital of Ghana. I was in a board meeting in a small conference room on the main floor of the Novotel in Accra, Ghana. And there were 7 people in the room, and me. I was the 8th person, 5 men, and so there was 9, 5 men and 3 women, and Ghanaian people, and I was the only white person. And Ghanaian people are very, very beautiful, black skin, very dark black, blue black almost. And we're having this conversation. It was a board meeting for the Hunger Project in Ghana. And I wasn't leading the meeting, fortunately. I was just sitting in on it from the global office. And during the discussion, there was a moment where the men, just the men, the 5 men, started to have orange geometric face paint appear on their black faces. And I was stunned. But no one said anything about this. So I thought, well, I must be hallucinating. And so I excused myself and went to the ladies' room, splashed my face with cold water, got myself together, went back, and they were still talking. Everybody was fine. Everybody looked normal again. And then 10 minutes later, the men started having orange geometric face paint on their black faces. And I just burst into tears. I was so shaken. And everyone asked me what was wrong, even the men with what I saw, face paint on their faces. And clearly nobody else saw this. So I said, I feel sick. I've been in too many times, so it's too many countries. I know I'm supposed to stay for 5, 6, 7 days, but I need to go. I need to go home. I need to go back to the United States. So they forgave me. I went up to my room. I was staying in the hotel. I packed my bag. I went to the airport. I took the first plane that I could get to Europe. It was to Frankfurt. And then I flew from Frankfurt to New York, and then New York to the United States. And the whole time, the faces just kept coming. And when I got home, I called my friend John Perkins, and he was in the Amazon, and I couldn't reach him, and I couldn't talk to anybody about it. Even my husband, Bill, I just told him I felt sick, and I was having these strange visions, and I really couldn't talk about it because I was scared I was going crazy. And then John came back, and he called me, and he said, I've been with the Achuar. They're waiting for us. We need to go. We need to take them 10, 12 people, including ourselves, people with global voice, people with open hearts, people who know the rainforest is critical to the future of life, people who know indigenous people have wisdom that they carry that we must have access to, and people who will respect the ways of the shaman. And so we put a group together that fit that criteria, including my husband, Bill, and we went down to the Quito, the capital of Ecuador, drove down the valley of the volcanoes, over the eastern side of the Andes, down through the Pastaza River Canyon until we got to the edge of the vast Amazon rainforest. And we flew in small planes into the Achuar territory where there were no roads, no navigable rivers. We landed on a very short little space by a river in a small plane. And then the plane took off, little plane. And then they came out of the forest with their orange geometric face paint, their yellow, red, and black feather crowns, and spears, and took us in their canoes to a place to camp. We spent 5, 6, 7 days with the Achuar leaders. Couldn't speak to them, didn't know how to communicate, but we participated in their ceremonies. We participated in their plant medicines, and we formed an alliance which became now the Pachamama Alliance, an alliance between the indigenous peoples of the Amazon and the Sacred Headwaters region and conscious, committed people in the modern world like you, Kirsten, and the people listening, for the sustainability of life. The two cultures coming together to protect not just the Amazon, but the sustainability of life. And that is now called the Pachamama Alliance. Pachamama meaning Mother Earth, and an alliance between these two parts of the world, the modern world and the ancient world, for the sustainability of life. Oh, I can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
I just want to thank you so much for telling us the whole story, because it's such an extraordinary story, and it's also a story about that life is much more magical than we think.
Yes.
And that there's so, if we're open to it and we make ourselves available, there's actually so many uh, signs and help to get, but we have to listen and have the courage to follow that
Yes. Yeah.
calling. So I'm so happy you told us about, because I feel that, you know, there's so many organizations that we can support, but this one is important because without the Amazon forest and the wisdom of the indigenous people, there's not much hope for humanity. I mean, this is the time to listen and to support that cause. So I wanted people to know about that important work.
Mm-hmm.
Our time is almost up, but I have one final question I hope you will
Okay.
answer. Because I've heard you talk many times about what you call the Sophia Century, and actually I had expected your book to be called the Sophia Century. And so I don't know if there's going to be a book called the Sophia Century or if this one is the Sophia Century, but could you just tell us why you speak about the Sophia Century? Because I find that it resonates a lot with me, but I'm not sure everybody understands exactly what you mean. Weren't you going to call this book the Sophia Century?
I was starting to work on a book called The Sophia Century, but this book came through first. So I think at some point I will do that, but it's not cooked and out of the oven quite yet. Well, I feel it's important to look at the long view, and this is the first century of the third millennium. And when you think of it that way, we're only 22, 23 years into the third millennium. And there's many prophecies that say that this 21st century is the century when women will take our rightful role in co-equal partnership with men and the world will come into balance. And there's a very powerful prophecy that's a little bit like the story I just told, but I'll tell it quickly. Baha'i prophecies, it says the bird of humanity has two great wings, a male wing and a female wing. And the male wing has been extended for centuries and it's very, very strong, while the female wing of the bird of humanity has been folded in and not yet fully expressed. So the male wing has gotten over muscular, overdeveloped, and even somewhat violent to keep the bird of humanity afloat. And we've been flying in circles for hundreds of years as a result. But in the 21st century, the prophecy says the female wing in all of us will fully extend. The male wing can thus relax a little bit, and the bird of humanity will finally soar. And I love that prophecy because it doesn't make masculine wrong and feminine right, or men wrong and women right, or it doesn't do anything. It just talks about how it's time for the divine feminine in all of us to be fully expressed and to rebalance the masculine, which has become in some cases very dysfunctional. In all of us, really, not just men, but men and women. And so I call this the Sophia century. The word Sophia refers to wisdom in the ancient Greek traditions, but in particular, divine feminine wisdom. And I think when you look at the crises that are facing us, what's being called for now to resolve them is what I say is divine feminine wisdom from everybody. And that is coming through you. And that's, I think, what came through you when you made your commitment after your son died, that has created all your courses and made you the leader that you are in Europe. I think it's coming through me. I think it's coming through all women in particular. And the metaphor I used of the birthing of a new kind of human being is the Sophia century at work in the feminine quality of all of us. Men build, women birth. And it's masculine to build and it's feminine to birth. And it's a time for rebirthing, recreating, redesigning humanity, redesigning our structures, our systems, our economy, our healthcare. Everything needs to be redesigned, resourced, but from a different space, from a space that has much more yin and less yang, more collaboration and less competition, more kindness, more respect for life. Not in opposition to anything, but in a resourcing of who we are. So, and I call it the Sophia century, and I call it that to call for women's leadership in particular. Because if you look at every single of the multiple crises, when women are at the table, the results are much more effective at the peace table, working on the environment, working on hunger and poverty, working on healthcare. All of it requires more of our yin energy, all of our yin energy, to rebalance. And so the Sophia Century probably will be a book someday. It's not yet. Now it's just a conversation. And I know that it's the conversation that you've been in for years, and a conversation that you lead with many, many people. And it's for all of us, not just women, women and men, but it's particularly appropriate for women to hear that call and to feel it in their bodies, to feel it in their hearts, to feel it in their souls, and to express themselves fully.
Thank you so much. And those who know me know why I asked that question, because I've been called to support the feminine in men and women for many, many, many years. I think for 30 years, I've just felt that calling and done what I could, created a goddess school, a millionaire school, and now I actually help both male and female leaders draw out the feminine, get that balance between the masculine and the feminine. So it's a calling that is very familiar to me. And I'm so grateful you spoke about that too, because I feel that this is also an invitation for all the people who feel that calling to open the heart and to get more in touch with their yin qualities, to actually go for it. So I hope that everybody who has heard this feel now that, yes, that inner whisper, listen to that and take it seriously and have the courage to step up and follow it. We can hear from your stories that even though it seems crazy and not rational, is so worth it to follow those whispers.
Yes.
Because they lead us to the new paths.
They do. They do. Yeah, absolutely.
And hopefully to a world that works for all.
Mm-hmm.
So Lynne, thank you so much for taking this time. I'm so grateful to have spent time with you. It's such a privilege for me because, as you can imagine, you're one of my greatest role models.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm so happy to meet you and to know you. And I have this feeling we'll work together now in many ways that we didn't know were coming, but are so grateful to have in front of us. So thank you. And thank you for the awesome work you have been doing for so long, and your incredible transformation out of the tragedy of your son is you've made that event such a seminal moment, not just for yourself, but for so many people, I'm sure. And you are a true gift to this world, and I'm honored to know you.
Lynne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, I really feel that the message that you have is so true. When it's not about ourselves, the world becomes so much bigger, and it's so much interesting to participate in the world. So I urge everybody to go and buy your book and start and support the Pachamama Alliance and step up and take leadership for a bright future at home, at work, and in the world. So thank you, Lynne, and have a blessed, blessed time, and we'll be in touch.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.